God gives life. God gives life even as the world gives death. God gives life even as we ourselves fear death. God gives life even after the tragedy and the mystery of death. God gives life. During Holy Week and at all times, we are called to surrender to the loving mystery of the Passion, of the narrow path that Jesus walks for us, the narrow path that God walks with us. That is the path of death and resurrection. This, if you were here at the beginning of our series for the first Sunday in Lent, you'll remember this is articulated in the core principles on our church website. It's one of the values we shared at the beginning of this worship series. It reads, "I believe the climax of this gospel narrative is the narrow path of death and resurrection, demonstrated for us by Jesus during the Passion. To be converted is to be willing to lose one's old life, and to be saved is to learn how to live again. This path offers us but a brief glimpse of the eternal love of God promised to us by Jesus. This means we are called to surrender to God, not only in death, as Jesus does in the Garden of Gethsemane, but also in life, as Jesus does when he is resurrected on Easter morning. We are called to surrender to God. I surrender myself to God without any conditions or reservations, the prophet writes. I shall not bargain with God. I shall not make my surrender piecemeal, but I shall lay bare the very center of myself, that all of my very being shall be charged with the creative energy of God. Little by little, or vast area by vast area, my life must be transmuted in the life of God. And as this happens, I come into the meaning of true freedom. And the burdens that I seemed unable to bear are floated in the current of life and the love of God. That prophet was Howard Thurman. God gives life. I shared 3 phrases at the beginning of our message today. I said, God gives life even as the world gives death. God gives life even as we ourselves fear death. And God gives life even after the tragedy and mystery of death. I want to explore those one by one. God gives life even as the world gives death. We've promoted our children's stories on our social media pages. If you follow those pages, you may also have seen that we shared a statement from the United Methodist Council of Bishops as well. It was a statement calling for a ceasefire in Gaza, specifically a permanent ceasefire in Gaza. We're also planning to email that statement out to the congregation this week. I'm going to go ahead and share that statement just in case anyone is unable to read it. It's not particularly controversial. It is a statement of faith, and I'll share it with all of you today. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. As bishops of the United Methodist Church, We call for an immediate and permanent ceasefire in the conflict between Hamas and Israel in Gaza, and pledge our prayers and commitment to work for a durable peace for Israelis, Palestinians, and all in the region. As United Methodists, we join others in encouraging diplomatic initiatives that will engage both Israelis and Palestinians in an effort to understand the fears, hopes, and aspirations of one another. Such strategies should actively seek a way to promote a just and lasting peace and cooperation that will lead to a two-state solution, an end to the current occupation and violence, and the creation of a viable Palestinian state living side by side with peace in Israel. On October 7th, 2023, an attack by Hamas left 1,200 Israelis dead and hundreds of hostages taken. Since then, more than 30,000 have been killed by Israel's bombardment of Gaza, the majority of them women and children. Innocent people continue to be killed because of the fighting, and many are dying of hunger and the spread of infectious disease. The ability of aid organizations to attend to the critical needs of the victims of this prolonged war has also been sharply limited by the lack of meaningful negotiations. On February 29th, starving Palestinians were fired upon as they sought food from an aid truck, with more than 100 persons killed by Israeli forces. It is estimated that 1.8 million Palestinians have been displaced, their homes and communities destroyed. The United Nations estimates that more than 500,000 people are living under catastrophic levels of deprivation and starvation. That's a direct quote from the United Nations. This is the continued statement of the bishops. I just want to clarify. This is still the statement of the Council of Bishops. We believe that the current military strategy of the Israeli government, supported by U.S. weapons transfers and aid, will only lead to the destruction of the entire Gaza Strip. An unconscionable death toll that grows daily, the perpetuation of one of the world's longest conflicts, and the proliferation of increased enmity between Israelis and Palestinians, which has historically led to an increase in militarization on both sides. There is no peace to be found in this strategy. The lack of a true ceasefire after more than 5 months of this deadly conflict compels us to raise our voices now. We call for an immediate and permanent ceasefire in the Gaza Strip and a commitment from all involved parties, including Israel, Palestinians, surrounding Middle East countries, the United States, and others, to pursue a lasting peace. We pledge our prayers and commitment to work for a durable peace, an end to the violence, and the release of the hostages. There ends the statement. It was a long statement. I chose to share the whole thing. This is the Council of Bishops of the United Methodist Church. This is a worldwide, global body of bishops. This includes bishops that serve here in North America, the United States. It includes bishops that serve in all continents of the world. So when the email, we're going to share this via email as well, just so everyone can read the statement. When that email goes out, it will also include a web link encouraging members and clergy in the United Methodist Church. That's all of us, friends. That's all of us. To contact their elected representatives to advocate for a ceasefire and increased humanitarian aid. So please look for that link this week as well. God gives life, even as we ourselves fear death. God gives life, even as we fear death. That was the second phrase we shared. The Romans came there carrying lanterns, torches, and weapons. Jesus knew everything that was going to happen to him, so he went out and he asked, "Who are you looking for?" They answered, "Jesus the Nazarene." Jesus said to them, "I am." Judas, his betrayer, was standing with them, and when he said, "I am," they shrank back and fell to the ground. He asked them again, "Who are you looking for?" And they said, "Jesus the Nazarene." Jesus answered, "I told you I am. If you are looking for me, then let these people go." This was so the word that he had spoken might be fulfilled. I didn't lose any one of those whom you gave me. And then Simon Peter, who had a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servant, cutting off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. But Jesus told Peter, "Put your sword away. Am I not to drink the cup that the Father has given me?" Jesus, in this passage, disarms Peter. And in doing so, he also disarms the Roman soldiers who have come to arrest him. Jesus puts an end to the violence and surrenders himself to the unconditional compassion of God. And make no mistake, it is that unconditional love that leads Jesus to the cross. It isn't God's wrath. It isn't God's pride. It isn't the world's wickedness. It is God's love, and God's love only, that calls Jesus to drink from this cup. Because God, becoming one of us, will not become the worst parts of us, but will only become our very death and our very life. God refuses to become the violence of the world, but instead will transform it into life once again. There is a resurrection on the horizon, and that is the way of God. The third phrase that we shared was, God gives life even after the tragedy and mystery of death. God gives us resurrection. God gives us new life. What else can we possibly do with this gift? What else can we do with this tremendous gift of divine love? Well, the priest writes, some of us are blind to this love, so we ignore it. Others do not believe that God surrenders, completely in love with us, and therefore reject God's love. Still others fear that a God of self-giving love could be weak, and so they question the divine love of God. And that's the one that makes me angry. Personally, that's the one that makes me angry. Some think that the God of self-giving love is a weak God, and so they question it. But for those who breathe in the Spirit of God, the surrender of God in love is the greatest act of humility. We can only receive this love in humility. That is what surrender means. We are called to surrender to God, not only in death, as Jesus does, but also in life, as Jesus does. God gives life, even as the world gives death. God gives life, even as we ourselves fear death. And God gives life, even after the tragedy and the mystery of death. I'm keeping an eye on the time here. I want to try to summarize these three ideas. I'm going to try to summarize them with a poem. It's a meditation from M. Sean Copeland, who's a black theologian in the Catholic Church. And I'm doing a fair bit of reading and quoting today. I know that some of you don't like it when I do that. But I feel that this is important because this is Holy Week. I feel it's important to share all of this. The message of Holy Week doesn't just come from me, it comes from God. And it's not just for us, it's for the world. It is for the world, this message. So this Holy Week, this message here, it's about all of us. So this poem, this meditation reads thus. To know and to follow Christ crucified is to know and love those children, women, and men who are poor, excluded, and despised, made different and unwelcome, lynched and crucified in our world. If we would follow Christ crucified, we would hear the echoes of ululation and bitter weeping in Gaza and in Rafah, in Baghdad and in Beirut, in Cairo and in Kigali. If we would follow Christ crucified, we would press to our hearts the tears that flowed from the eyes of Cherokee, Seminole, and Choctaw children and women and men who limped through the cold and hunger from Oklahoma to Arkansas and Alabama and Mississippi. If we would follow Christ crucified, we would recover the tears that fell on the floors of the camps at Auschwitz, Treblinka, and Sobibor. If we would follow Christ crucified, we would retrieve the tears that flowed from the eyes of children and women and men who crowded into flimsy boats and old trucks and shipping containers to suffocate and die in front of fences strung across the desert, at abandoned checkpoints on the outer edge of rural towns, and at heavily guarded borders near rivers and waterways. If we would follow Christ crucified with attention, reverence, and devotion, we would recognize that the tears and blood and moans of the innocent have been absorbed into the air we breathe, have seeped into our streams and oceans, into the earth in which we plant and from which we harvest and eat. If we follow with attention, reverence, and devotion the moans and tears of the brutalized and burned, the abused and mutilated, enslaved and captive across the centuries, we are led to the ground beneath the cross of the crucified Jewish Jesus of Nazareth. If we, who would be his disciples, recall the night before he died, we are led to a table, from a table to a garden, from a garden to a courtyard, from a courtyard to a hill, from a hill to a grave, and from a grave to life. The table holds the self-gift of his flesh and blood. The garden is watered by his tears and his blood. The cross holds him, even as the one whom he knows and loves lifts him up from the grave to release him into the surprise of hope and life. Blessed are the peacemakers. That was the message of the Council of Bishops. Blessed are the peacemakers. God gives us life, even as the world gives death. God gives life even as we fear death. And God gives life even after the tragedy and the mystery of death. In all things, God gives life. Amen.